Hi, I'm Elizabeth Bowman and welcome to the Scene Room. Today I have Michael Morreale here. He is a digital content producer and consultant in Toronto. He specializes in video production, online learning, and digital project management. He has worked with brands like the CBC, Toronto Symphony Orchestra, the Royal Conservatory, Banff Centre, and AGI. His work has been featured in Maclean's Magazine, the Globe and Mail, PBS, and The Guardian. Michael has a lot of practical advice in this episode. I'm really excited to share it with you. We had a great conversation about branding and digital content creation. If you are enjoying the podcast, please like it, subscribe to it, share it. All of these small actions really do result in keeping this podcast going. So let's get to it. Michael, welcome to the Scene Room. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I've been enjoying watching and listening along.
Thank you. Where are we talking to you from?
Yeah, I'm at my house now on the east side of Toronto, so I spend most of my time here.
Great. And do you have a studio in your house?
I don't know. If you put a microphone in a room, does that make it a studio?
That's a good question.
All sorts of people, they say when I get on a Zoom call and I use this same setup, the line that I always use is, if I don't have anything smart to say, I might as well look and sound good saying it.
Yeah. I used to say that when I was singing for a living. I used to say 75% of my job is to look the part. 25% is the rest. But I mean, obviously, it's you got to work towards performing well. I'm just saying that from a psychological point of view, it really does help to look the part and feel the part. Then you are that part.
We'll take what we can get, right?
Let's talk about how you got to where you are, your journey into communications, marketing, and all of this arts business.
I've been really lucky. I've been able to have a number of different perspectives in my career is maybe one way you could say it. So straight out of school, my first job was at CBC, producing a radio show with the wonderful Julian Israela. And there was all about, let's think about how we can talk about music in a way that is accessible to people, that is interesting, that is human. And I was lucky to have that as my starting point, where there was a big audience with high expectations all the time. I moved on from there to actually work within the arts world directly. The Toronto Symphony, I was there a director for a number of years, where we did a number of digital initiatives and marketing initiatives where I sort of started to get my marketing chops. And then I kind of challenged myself to do something entirely different. And I said, the arts have been wonderful. Let's see what the rest of the world is like. So I did a total left turn. I worked in the agriculture industry at a big equipment manufacturer, learned all sorts of things about how the world works, about how marketing works, about how audiences and companies or organizations interact. And now I'm at the point where I'm putting it all together, running my own show as both a consultant and a sort of video production work with clients. All this to say, it's a lot of different perspectives that I'm bringing to this work that is from the beginning been just all about marketing and storytelling and thinking about how that looks like.
I love that because obviously your story is helping you tell other people's story, and all of those different perspectives definitely paint a really comprehensive picture. In your experience, how has the marketing and communications industry evolved? And particularly because of the audience listening to this, particularly in the performing arts and creative sector.
Well, and this goes back to how you and I first met many years ago. Of course, the media landscape has changed so much within the arts. It wasn't that long ago where you would expect to get a feature in a big newspaper or a review in the newspaper or coverage when you're doing something important. Of course, that's all changed. And I think we're all by now beyond the point of complaining about it, and now at the point of, okay, we have to tell our own story. Our job isn't to pitch the stories to audiences or to newspapers or media outlets. Our job is to do that ourselves. So that, of course, was a huge shift, and it's been really interesting to see how different organizations have done it in a number of different ways. And, you were the one who has helped so many people do that too. So I know that you have a lot to say on that topic. But I think what it's meant is that organizations have really gotten to know their audience in a different kind of way, and that conversation is a little bit more back and forth in the process through social media and getting that feedback instantly. I think it's overall been a good thing, even if it's a job that didn't really need to be done before when the landscape was differently.
I mean, obviously we have so many tools now and so many different ways to tell stories, and that can overwhelm artists and creators. But I do love the empowerment of having those tools to tell the story. And I remember when they first were coming out, when Twitter just came out of almost nowhere, and Facebook, and the idea of just putting a video up and saying who you are was a really wonderful thing. And I remember talking to my clients about it at the time and saying, well, who's to say you don't do that? Let's just say you do that, because they were worried about, oh, I don't know if casting directors are thinking of me in this role. Tell everyone that you're working on it.
It's empowering. If you say it out loud, if you put it out on the internet, then it's true. But it's a whole new skill set that people needed to develop and are still developing as the landscape is changing currently as well.
Yeah, I would like to see more emphasis on interview strategy and execution in performing arts programs. I'd like to see them really practicing and honing in those interview skills, because you often hear people rambling on, not getting to the point, or not understanding that, for instance, if you're on a radio broadcast, you should really only have 1 or 2 points that you want to get out of that interview, and you need to reiterate those points, because obviously someone's got to remember from that interview,
Yeah, well, on that, it's 2 specific skills. It's one, being on this side of camera and how you're supposed to act and what is useful to act in that way. And then the technical and strategic side of, operating a camera, of, putting yourself out there, even if it's a quick video. We don't learn that in music school. We don't learn that even as you're starting out as a marketer. You just got to pick it up on your own.
Can you share an example of a branding or marketing campaign that you've worked on or admired that has really stood out, and what, in your opinion, made it so effective?
A lot of what stands out in my mind is times in my career where things have gone, not well, or I've had great learning experiences from things. But I had one particular marketing, challenge put to me, which was sort of a once in a lifetime sort of moment. And that was at the Toronto Symphony. 2017, Toronto Symphony was lucky to get a really significant amount of funding from the federal government to celebrate Canada's sesquicentennial. It was a big project of all sorts of Canadian music for a year. But the marketing side of it was the government saying, we need this to be very impactful. We need this to touch as many Canadians as possible. What if we gave you enough funding? What can you do as a marketer to make sure that enough people in Canada see this? So with that big annoying thing of not having enough money off the table, my goal was to record all the concerts, which was 40 concerts in a year, and then use that content, promote it, get it online to get it seen by as many people across Canada as possible. This was a situation of being able to think outside the box because, suddenly we had proper budgets to do things. And in the end, we did hit our target, which was 16 million Canadians. So it is possible. And even if it's not something that going forward will happen on this scale, learned a lot about dissemination of content that still informs when I'm creating something with even the smallest of arts organization. How do we actually get people to hear this? How do we create content for audience that is worth our time and they enjoy creating it?
That brings me to my next question, which is, for the arts organizations that don't have big budgets, do you have maybe 3 practical tips that they can use to increase their visibility and build their brand?
The first thing I would say is build your squad. And this doesn't mean going out hiring a big expensive ad agency that of course is out of reach. It might be training on the personal level of taking some courses online or LinkedIn Learning, which I love for short courses. And it might be pulling in freelance support on certain projects that are really important. Because when it comes to reaching an audience, the number one thing that you have to do is create things with consistency. So I see a lot of organizations, and they have an initiative where they can create some content around that initiative, but that initiative ends, or the quiet part months before the performance happens and there's not the content happening. I mean, the only way that you're going to grow an audience is consistent content that is actually speaking to and informed by your audience. So that's number 2. And the number 3 on what to do would be just to keep a really good library of content that you see from other organizations that does well, and really analyze it, be strategic about what are they doing that's working that I can apply within my own organization within the limitations that I have at my own. So that would be my starting point.
Also, I imagine that if you're keeping a library of effective marketing strategies that are being done in North America or around the world, you could also share those in your stories, not necessarily in your posts, because obviously your posts are for your branded content, but you could applaud those organizations for doing what they're doing, and that would increase targeted engagement too, right?
That's right. Yeah. And social media is a two-way street anyway. So engaging, interacting with these other posts too is another way of growing your audience without spending a lot of money or even time.
So a lot of individual artists listen to this podcast. So I know that they would be interested in learning strategies that they can use to stand out and connect with audiences in the digital space. What would you suggest to them?
Yeah, a couple of things. First would be to really understand who your audience is. Look at your existing followers, look at the people who are in the audience at your performance. Everything you can figure out about who these people are beyond, I guess, as a starting point, beyond how old they are, what they do for a living, what else they enjoy outside of attending your performances. Because the more you can understand about your audience, the more you can create things that your audience will like. So that's the first thing. And the second is directly related to that, which is speak to your audience directly. I mean, I think a lot of people think of it as from yourself, as this is what I want to say, but think of it as this is what I want to hear as the audience member. Because if you're answering their most common questions, if you're talking about the topics that they're most interested in, that's how you're going to capture their attendance. And a great example of this is, say you're an organization creating social media content, you're looking at posts that do well, you survey your audience to find out what their most frequently asked question might be, you look at your Google Analytics to see what people are searching to land on your website. Sometimes it's things like, where do I find parking nearby? This isn't the thing that you may think of first when it comes to creating content, but if you're answering the questions that your audience have, then you'll start to develop that relationship with them that you can go back and forth on through content that you're creating.
That's great. The where do I find parking nearby? Because there should be a video. If there isn't one existing, even a short video of someone driving a car and driving up whatever that main street is, and then seeing that parking sign, giving people a visual of the arrival of the experience of getting to the theater or the opera house or wherever they're going.
This is Toronto. Like, this may be the number one thing that someone is hesitating about before purchasing a ticket to your downtown Toronto performance if they're coming from somewhere a little further out from the core.
I get anxious, and I live just outside of New York City. I'm lucky because I have a parking spot in Lincoln Center because of my husband's job. But if I didn't have that, I must say it would give me anxiety, because then it's suddenly this huge thing. Do I book it in advance? They have all these apps and things like that. Mm-hmm. It's insane. So that's great. Checking out what people are Googling for your organization and answering those questions. I love that.
Yeah. And actually, can I get really specific on that, just in case that helps? So if you set up the Google Search Console, which is how your site interacts with Google, what information you're giving it to it directly, that it's not pulling from what it finds. There's a little tab in there that you can see exactly what have people searched to be landing on my site. Some other website analytics will tell you this as well. I found some surprising things that you can create content about, of how people are coming to find you. It's not always what you'd think.
Okay, let's get even more specific. What about the digital tools or platforms that you think are must-haves for artists and or organizations to enhance their online presence?
Yeah, sure. That's a big question. I think the first, biggest, most obvious one is your strategy, is your digital strategy. For a lot of people, look, we have a lot of things to do. It's easy just to start doing something and running with it. But to take some time to really document what you're trying to do online with your digital strategy can answer that question. Again, who is your audience? What are their needs? How can I serve them online? And how can I unfold if you're a season throughout a year, how can that unfold online? What will that look like? What are the big moments that I really want to create a lot of content around, or build a digital experience around as much as possible? So you start with that digital strategy. That does make it easier as you're busy performing or selling tickets throughout the year to actually stick to it and create something. The other part of that strategy will be your channel strategy. So where are you going to be most active online? It is not the best strategy to just have an account on every single platform you can imagine and create the same piece of content and drop it everywhere. Of course, that's not going to work. So I'd recommend taking some time to really think carefully about, where do I want to live online? And that's based on where your audience lives, where you know they are now. where you've spent time and energy building up, and where strategically might make sense to keep building, where strategically might make sense to not. Is there, for example, a certain social media platform that is just getting kind of sketchy lately and you don't want to associate yourself with? Maybe don't spend the time there anymore.
I wonder where that is.
Could be anything.
Could be anything. That's great advice. Starting this podcast, I've been through this exercise many times with my clients, looking at the various social media platforms and which ones are most organic to them. And it might be surprising to know that it is different based on the person, because they interact with the different platforms differently, as we are all human and we are all different. And with the Scene Room podcast, I did the same exercise, and I get a really high impression rate on LinkedIn, which I've never had before. So hi, LinkedIn. And I'm enjoying it. And I'm now on LinkedIn a lot more than I was before because my impression rate is much higher there. The likes might not necessarily translate into that high impression rate yet. And I'm hoping that people will start showing themselves and liking the post and reacting to the posts. So it's interesting. And then also I decided at the beginning that I would drop the video content onto both YouTube and Facebook to see how it would perform. And I have a huge amount of listeners on YouTube, whereas Facebook, I've just made a decision that I'm not going to continue to drop the full episodes on Facebook because it's just not performing as well. So to your point, I'm reacting to the data that is presented to me, and I will then go forward with the podcast with that strategy.
Yeah. And I guess you wouldn't know that unless you started out being on a certain number of platforms to see what sort of bubbles to the surface for you. LinkedIn is a really interesting one. I mean, you know this. I love LinkedIn. It's been sort of a newer interest of mine because in the past it was seen as this B2B corporate thought leader, weird sort of space. But that has shifted, especially as some of these other platforms have scared people away. To our point a few moments ago, LinkedIn has been a really good place to actually connect with audiences. And there's a few reasons for it. One is that LinkedIn has a big sort of lurker culture and not so much a poster culture. So there's not as many people creating content on LinkedIn. And I think this creates a real big opportunity for arts organizations, for artists, because the audiences are there. And it's evolved beyond the LinkedIn that we knew a few years ago. So I think there's something there. It's interesting that you say that.
Also, there are highly educated people on LinkedIn. And in terms of opera and symphony audiences, that aligns with a lot of the target audiences to fill up their halls. So I think that LinkedIn is definitely worth investing in if you're an arts organization, for sure.
But one quick thing on it that I should have mentioned on LinkedIn is that, yes, there are company pages that are on behalf of an organization, but they don't do really well. What LinkedIn wants to see is content coming from individuals. So organizations are having to work with their CEOs or leadership to create content for their pages, which really changes how you think of it. And so putting time into creating a company page doesn't always pay off. Investing in your people for them to create content, whatever that looks like, is where it starts to pay off a little bit more, I think, for organizations of any size.
That makes sense because, most of the stuff I interact with as well is individual content, which obviously these people are working for big organizations, but the motivation is that someone is telling me something and I'm reacting to that personal message rather than like an organization being like, oh, we have a new season.
Yeah, it changes your messaging and what that looks like and the level of trust when it's coming from an individual, not an organization, arts organization or not, is so much higher.
Yeah. And also if they are talking about their new season, they're not talking about it in a way that's like, here's our new season. They're talking about something very specific, either a problem that they needed to solve or, something about their marketing strategy. They're talking as if it is behind the scenes, but that's the most effective messaging on LinkedIn as far as I can see. I haven't done the research that you likely have.
Yeah. And so if I were working within an organization and, a season launch was coming up or some big piece of news was coming up, part of the work that would need to be done is working with your leadership to equip them with, maybe it's letting them go off and create their own videos. Maybe it's you doing it for them as like a ghost writer or something to support them. This has changed how, PR and publicity used to be but is an important opportunity in terms of telling your story and shaping your story for how it rolls out online.
Can I ask about your process in terms of your work? Like when you're invited to do your consulting work along with your videography work, can you tell me a bit about what happens, like step 1 through 3 or something?
Yeah, good question. And on the two sides would be a little bit different maybe. But I think what I bring to my video work and my consulting work always comes back to the experience that I have from being a marketer in the corporate world to working in broadcasting and media to working within a nonprofit organization. And it's always starting with those big strategic questions to start off. Again, who is your audience? What is the message? What action do you want them to take? What channels do you have available to you to tell that story? So that when you're actually creating something and rolling it out, you know that it's something that is working against your business objectives or, whatever objectives that you have with that particular project that it is. When I do my consulting work with the arts firm, we have a standard practice and process where we're always starting with interviews of audience members of an organization and stakeholders, which might be other people in the community, funders, government, to really be able to tell that story. And I'm always really surprised that people working within an organization, they have a pretty good idea of what their audience says, but there's always little surprises in there that they learn about their audience through these surveys, through these conversations that we have early on. And then I always like to hope that we're sort of creating a culture of really doing that research on an annual and regular basis so that you can say that you want to understand your audience, but to actually step up and do it has led to so much success on future initiatives as well.
Conversation is key to excellent communication. On the Kate Pizzaroni episode, we talked about how it would be great if marketers could do a speed dating style setup with the artists individually and spend 5 minutes with each of the artists that will be performing on the stage. And I mean, we were thinking of an opera production because obviously there are a lot of artists that are on the stage during those performances. But the idea of what would come as a result of those conversations and the individuals having those conversations, because everyone writing down their thoughts individually and then coming back to the marketing table and coming up with a strategy based on creative. It's all about collaboration, conversation. I mean, it's not rocket science, but it is, for some reason, harder than it should be to get all these people together.
Yeah, and I think we do a pretty good job at having conversations with individual audience members or people we know who are sort of close to us. We can have those conversations. What gets a little bit harder is to be, it's not rocket science, but it is a little bit of science of developing a survey that hits a larger segment of your audience that doesn't leave out the people who you're not going to go up to them and talk to them, but you see that are coming to your performance. Because these are just the broader insights that you can have over your audience to stop those assumptions that you have in these backstage conversations of, I think our audience wants this. Well, don't think. We can ask and we can get those answers from a very data-informed and certain sense.
What do you think with AI entering the equation now in full force? It sort of almost came in overnight, where now everyone seems to be using AI to help them make their emails more polite or...
Or whatever the case may be. I saw it was, and it hasn't been that long. There was an interview with Barack Obama like a year and a half ago where he said the only human invention with the same amount of impact as AI has been the invention of electricity or the discovery of electricity. And at the time it sounded like, just sort of a big statement, but yes, it can change everything. And I know there's all sorts of conversation around it. So I'll sort of bring it down to the level that I see it. If you think of it like a co-pilot where, in the cockpit of a plane, you can tell that pilot what to do. It's all things that you can do yourself, but the second set of hands is helpful. AI will be successful when you can use it to do the things that give you more time to do the things that are important. Flying the plane, landing right on the runway, for instance, to run with that a little too far. So there are certainly AI tools that can be used. I think we all have developed now a pretty good sense of what are the things that we don't want to replace, what are the things that I would have spent a couple hours learning how to do that I can just have AI do to make more time in the rest of my day? So there's those sort of questions. I've also made room in my own schedule to be experimenting because of how quickly new tools are appearing. And I'm just starting a year-long process, thanks to Canada Council on some funding, to explore AI tools and document that process a little bit. Because if you're watching the news and seeing new tools come available, it can be very overwhelming. So taking a step back, asking yourself the question, what is the problem that you want to solve? Well, there may be an AI component to solving it.
That's great that you're doing that work, because right now I'm imagining that arts organizations will really benefit from looking over their statistics, all of the numbers that need to be analyzed that they don't necessarily have a data analytics professional to deal with, given budgets.
100%. That's like one of the first things I would do. I mean, there's, of course, been a large amount of data collected over the years, hopefully, about who is purchasing tickets, how people are engaging with you across social media platforms, by email. So that data analytics part of it is a great example, because I know we have these conversations of big, scary AI things that we never want to have AI do for us. I think we're pretty okay with having them tally up results of certain things or find trends that, we're maybe not able to do ourselves.
What are some mistakes you think organizations or individuals make when creating a promotional video?
I would say with anything, before you start hitting the record button on a video, to really think strategically about how this is going to roll out. There are a lot of video projects where people have come to me and we start talking about it and we discover this isn't going to be a 3-minute video like you're asking for. It's going to be 3 1-minute videos that can tell 3 different portions of this, because we know that these shorter style videos are more effective on social media for this reason. That's saved a lot of time and a lot of creative editing when those decisions are made early on. So what makes a good video? One, it speaks to the needs of your audience. It does it in a really concise way, and it does it in an interesting way, because usually the easy way is not especially interesting. Having just some guy in front of a camera talking. The more you can show things rather than tell, the more effective that particular video will be. But of course, like anything else, it depends.
And how important do you think is the branding element to anything, video, print, advertising, all that stuff? When it comes to an organization, what is the most important thing for visual branding?
I think the brand is very important, and the branding reflects that. So the brand is who you are and what story, what message it is that you're trying to craft and share. The branding of the colors and the fonts you use is nice, but not as important as the big picture. The big picture is being consistent with telling the story from the same perspective all the time. And what I mean by that is, you're building this image of you or your organization. And if you're always, painting a different picture, doing it in a different way, then your brand is going to suffer. You're going to confuse people. When I'm working with people on creating social media content and we're trying to come up with ideas, oftentimes it's coming up with ways to say the same thing over and over in slightly different ways. And that sort of consistency is how you build that brand, how you're building that trust with your audience. So the brand, very important. The branding, yes, you want to look professional and polished, but it's not as important, to me at least, as the big picture.
Yeah, when I am helping artists with their brand, when I'm teaching that, the easiest way to teach it is to point them to Canva and say, okay, now write down the type of content you want to share and then put that into categories. So, and ideally by the end, they have maybe 4 or 5 categories of like big picture categories of the types of things. Like maybe it's, just to simplify this, behind the scenes, on stage, personal. So there are 3 in this version, but oftentimes we'll have more than 3 things. And oftentimes you'll have things that are more prone to have video content. Other times you'll have maybe press quotes or something that you want to share. And then I ask them to find a template on Canva and assign it to one of the categories. And then it's just a matter of them filling in. They're like, oh, I've got this picture. What category is that going into? Then they don't have to think so hard. because all of the category management has been done before. They did all that work in putting together the brand strategy, I guess you would call it.
Yeah, and that's the work. And it's funny. Sometimes people talk about going to AI to generate ideas of what to come up with to talk about. And anyone who I know who is an interesting enough person never has trouble coming up with interesting things to say. This is not, to me, the application of AI that I think is going to be useful. It's easy to come up with things to say. What's hard is coming up with consistent things to say. So that exercise that you describe is really similar to what I do with my own clients and what I do for my personal content that I'm creating, is I kind of create this matrix where on the top of the matrix, I say, what are the topics that we want to talk about? And on the y-axis, I guess, it's how are we going to talk about them? So topics, I talk about marketing, I talk about digital marketing, I talk about videos. On the other side, I talk about a news item, I talk about a tip, I talk about a case study. You can mix and match those things and come up with almost unlimited things to talk about. That's never the hard part. But having a structure certainly makes it a lot easier.
And especially if someone's a performing artist and they're backstage, and oftentimes they feel uncomfortable taking photos backstage.
Sure.
I'm not sure what it is, because they sound amazing on the stage, but then they get off stage and they lose all that confidence and they feel, oh, I don't want to take a picture now. Oh, it's just too much. But if they have a set list of things that they can photograph, they're like, okay, well, I'll check that off and I'll check this off. And it just makes life easier. I mean, when we have directives and lists, makes life easier.
I agree. And to our earlier point too, of building your team, building your squad, if this is something that you're uncomfortable with, that is not your area of expertise, just get help. Get someone like you to come in and give them that list, and don't feel bad about it, because the total number of skills that an artist needs to have to be successful, it's such a long list that it would be impossible for everyone to have them all. So it's just part of the process.
To wrap things up, I just want to ask if there's one piece of advice you'd give to performers looking to grow their brand or business, like what would that one piece of advice be?
I'll pull it full circle here, which is consistency. If you're strategic about saying the same thing over and over, if you're consistent about sticking to your posting schedule, about creating content on a really regular basis that is informed by your audience, that is speaking directly to your audience with their needs in mind. There's no hack to solving these problems, but that's the best way to start.
Great advice. Consistency is helped by collaboration. And so for artists who are nervous about posting or brainstorming about things to post, always think of your colleagues and think of the happenings around you. Think of those cafes you go to, the restaurants you eat dinner at. Think about all these other things, so that you're not necessarily feeling uncomfortable sharing only yourself on social media, because people are interested in those collaborative stories.
If you're an artist, you have a huge number of people who are paying money to come and see you perform. You have something to say, people want to hear it.
Thanks for doing this.
You're welcome. Thank you. This has been fun.